Yeah, thanks for joining us. This is Notepad. My name is Ibrahim Sani. Last week, ASB and PNB announced the dividends earnings for 2022. And of course, much has been said, much has been debated, and of course, some of the outlook conversations have also been discussed at length, not just here on Astro AWANI, but elsewhere as well. But the idea here, of course, is trying to do a quick recap in terms of what is in store for us for 2023. Not just for PNB and ASB per se, but the investment landscape outright. So joining this particular conversation is a recap of my colleague's presentation, Najib Aroff, in terms of what happened at PNB in them declaring the 3.5 cent per unit dividend for 2022. Do take a look into Najib Aroff's presentation.
Okay, ni explanationnya. The other day I went to this editor's briefing. So ini adalah explanation kenapa angka itu adalah sedemikian. Okay, saya nak bawakan. Angka ini dan juga graf ini agak complicated. Saya akan cerahkan dan juga pecahkan. Kalau kita melihat kepada keadaan semasa pada ketika ini adalah graf perjalanan time frame-nya untuk melihat kepada pasaran. Kerana PNB melalui dana ASB dan sebagainya ini banyak melabur dalam pasaran equity sebagai contoh. Kita melihat event demi event, keadaan demi keadaan. Kalau kita melihat kepada pertama sekali pencerobohan Rusia ke atas Ukraine yang berlaku menyaksikan penurunan pasaran tersebut, dan juga pada ketika ini EU bertindak balas terhadap serangan ataupun perang tersebut dengan menyekat ataupun berikrar mengurangkan 2/3 pembelian gas dari Rusia. Ini juga mengganggu gugat kestabilan pasaran dan juga rantaian bekalan tersebut. Dan kalau kita melihat kemudian ia disusuli oleh krisis ekonomi yang melanda di negara maju, dan the Fed mula meningkatkan dengan secara agresif kadar faedah mereka. Ini akan diikuti oleh kebanyakan bank-bank pusat di dunia termasuk juga Malaysia untuk kita matchkan. Nanti saya tunjukkan angka dia macam mana untuk kita melihat perbezaan angka kadar faedah tersebut. Kemudian ada beberapa perkara lagi. China melaksanakan perintah berkurung yang ketat. Sekarang ini dah longgar sedikit, tetapi masih lagi border sempadan masih lagi ditutup di negara China. Itu juga memberikan gangguan kepada pasaran. Kalau kita melihat juga ECB, Bank Pusat Eropah, kali pertama juga menaikkan kadar faedah dalam tempoh 11 tahun. Ini juga melibatkan dua faktor lah, gangguan pasaran tersebut yang menyusut, dan kenaikan kadar faedah memberikan kesan kepada pulangan dalam pelaburan tersebut. Dan kalau kita melihat juga inflasi di negara maju termasuk didahului oleh Amerika Syarikat tertinggi dalam tempoh 40 tahun. Kalau kita lihat 9.1%, di Eropah juga begitu. Di Asia kita masih lagi dalam keadaan yang stabil, di Malaysia khususnya kerana kita ada subsidi yang besar, 80 bilion ringgit. IHP teras juga, indeks harga pengguna yang mengukur inflasi di Amerika Syarikat juga masih lagi pada paras 40 tahun tertinggi, 6.6% ketika year to date lah, ketika pada keadaan ini. Baik, apabila melabur dalam banyak equity dan sebagainya, kita perlu melihat kepada pasaran equity di peringkat antarabangsa. Sudah pasti ini apa yang dikeluarkan oleh PNB. Kalau kita melihat S&P 500 di pasaran Amerika Syarikat ini, year to date dia negatif 14.4% berbanding pada tahun 2021. Kita melihat pulangannya ataupun keadaannya adalah positif 26.9%. Begitu juga dengan pasaran-pasaran lain. Di Asia juga kita lihat Nikkei 225 negatif pada tahun ini, year to date negatif 2.9% as compared to positif 4.9%. ASEAN juga, MSCI ASEAN juga kalau kita melihat, termasuk juga Malaysia kalau kita melihat, negatif 6.8% berbanding negatif 2%. Okey, rangkumannya bermakna pasaran-pasaran ini berdepan dengan kejatuhan pada tahun 2022. Inilah yang menyebabkan bahawa pulangan tersebut menurun. Kalau kita melihat kepada aset-aset kelas yang lain juga akan menurun. Sekejap lagi saya akan tunjukkan. Tetapi saya nak tunjukkan di FPM KLCI, pasaran kita. Ini adalah trendnya. Kalau kita melihat untuk Disember 2021, sehinggalah kepada tahun ini ataupun year to date November 2022, trend graf ini kita melihat menurun. Kalau sebelum ini paras psikologi untuk pasaran kita adalah 1,500 mata, kini kita melihat di bawah 1,500 mata. Pada pembukaan kita lihat 1,567 mata yang kita lihat untuk FPM KLCI. Namun pada year to date kita melihat adalah sebanyak 1,488, ataupun kalau kita lihat year to date negatif 5% dan juga untuk FPM KLCI, dan FBM 100 adalah negatif 6%. Itu keadaan pasaran kita. Okey, saya sebut tadi nak bandingkan di mana kadar faedah kita berbanding dengan Amerika Syarikat kerana The Fed menaikkan kadar mereka dengan keadaan begitu agresif sekali. Ini datanya. Kalau kita melihat di sebalik kenaikan kadar faedah tersebut dan juga kebimbangan kemelesetan yang berlaku ketika ini, kita melihat pada tahun 2022 Amerika Syarikat menaikkan daripada kadar 1.75 ini terus menaik kepada 4 peratus dengan 75 agresif. Jadi kita cuba catch up dalam keadaan pada ketika ini untuk melihat supaya kita tidak ketinggalan dari segi potensi pulangan untuk pelabur dalam pasaran kita. Sebab itu kita meningkatkan kadar faedah kita ataupun OPR kita. Sekarang ini Malaysia berada pada 2.75 berbanding 1.75 untuk tempoh yang sangat panjang kita laksanakan tersebut bermula 2020 sehinggalah kepada 2022 ketika COVID melanda yang lepas. Itu sebabnya kenapa OPR ini meningkat untuk kita faham. Dan perbezaan kedua-dua ini menyebabkan bahawa pulangan itu menyaksikan norma baru dalam pulangan. Okey, ini sangat penting. Nanti Ibrahim boleh sentuh dengan tetamu juga. Kita melihat 2022 juga menjadi anomali yang baharu. Okey, saya terangkan macam mana graf ini. Aksis ini kalau kita melihat adalah US bond dan juga equity di sebelah sini. Ini perbandingan mengikut tahun dalam tempoh 100 tahun yang lebih sejak 1871. Kalau kita melihat ini setiap titik ini menggambarkan tahun-tahun tertentu. Tahun-tahun ini sama ada kalau equity negatif, bond mesti positif. Kalau bond positif, equity akan negatif. Ini normal biasa kita saksikan. Tapi 2022 dia sangat berbeza, unprecedented. Kedua-duanya negatif. Kalau kita melihat ini penerangan mereka, nanti AM bertanya dengan pakar untuk melihat ini juga memberikan kesan kepada pulangan pelaburan. Bagaimana untuk kita melihat anomali dalam pasaran pada ketika ini. Dan kalau kita melihat juga apa yang dibentangkan oleh PNB pada sebelum ini, kalau kita melihat momentum pertumbuhan global juga semakin menyusut. Ini graf-grafnya kalau kita lihat 2021, 2022 expected adalah pada paras 3.2% dan untuk forecast 2023 juga semakin menyusut. Begitu juga dengan zon Eropah, begitu juga dan juga di China juga. Hanya 2023 sahaja China diunjurkan untuk meningkat sedikit, mungkin disebabkan oleh pembukaan pasaran mereka. Okey, bukan itu sahaja. Kalau kita melihat antara perkara lain yang disentuh dalam briefing tersebut, beberapa perkara yang saya ingin melihat, ini asset under management ataupun aset di bawah pengurusan PNB ini sangat menarik. Kalau kita melihat walaupun cabaran itu berlaku, tetapi jumlah aset di bawah pengurusan ini kekal meningkat berbanding 312 bilion kalau kita melihat, sekarang ini 343 bilion, peningkatan 1.9% berbanding 2021. Ini untuk tahun 2020 ataupun year to date 2022 lah untuk PNB. Ini aset under management, berapa besar aset yang diuruskan oleh PNB sendiri, dan bukan itu saja kalau kita melihat juga ini jumlah langganan yang semakin meningkat, tetapi ini yang menarik. Ini nanti yang boleh discusskan juga. Kalau kita melihat 2021 terlebih dahulu, asset allocation, pembahagian aset pelaburan untuk PNB ini, sebahagian besarnya adalah equity awam domestik, 61.5%, sudah pasti 30.3% adalah syarikat strategik yang dilabur oleh PNB sendiri, plus dan sebagainya. Okey, tetapi kalau kita melihat equity awam antarabangsa ini 11%, tunai pun begitu, pendapatan tetap 6.5%, dan kalau kita bandingkan dengan tahun 2022, perbezaannya adalah kalau kita melihat equity awam antarabangsa 11.8% dan juga deposit tetap, fixed deposit ini ataupun pendapatan tetap ini 7.1%. Ada peningkatan berbanding 6.5% dari segi asset allocation tersebut. Okey, dalam graf ini apa yang saya ingin lihat adalah ini global, sumbangan peringkat global dari segi pelaburan oleh PNB sendiri. Kalau kita melihat 2021 adalah 17%. Ini angkanya ya. 17%, tetapi 2022 adalah 19%. Kita dengar semakin meningkat. Namun dari segi pulangan untuk dividen adalah 2021 di peringkat global 30% pulangan kepada dividen untuk PNB. Tetapi 2022 meskipun meningkat dari segi pelaburan global mereka 19%, tapi pulangan dividen mereka hanyalah 9%. Bermaksud mereka mengurangkan keadaan tersebut dan juga memberikan tumpuan kepada aset kelas yang lain. Dan ketika saya tanya kepada PNB juga apakah ada aset kelas terbaru, mereka akan memberikan tumpuan insya-Allah dalam sektor infrastruktur. Ya, bagaimana? Itu kita akan nantikan dalam pengumuman mereka. Dan sudah pasti kita menantikan juga keadaan ini dan juga apa yang mereka akan laksanakan untuk memastikan dana kita. Ini semua orang sudah tahu bagaimana nilai hampir 9 bilion ringgit diagihkan melalui agihan untuk tahun ini. 10.6 juta pemegang unit menerima manfaat melibatkan 4.6 sen jumlah agihan, dan juga jumlah agihan ini seperti kita tahu 3.35 sen adalah dividen dan 1.25 sen adalah bonus. Kemudian tahun ini diberikan bonus tambahan 0.50 sen seunit untuk 30,000 unit pertama. Ini kena faham ya, 30,000 unit pertama. Kalau anda ada 100,000, yang 100,000 itu dapat 4.6 sen seunit dan 30,000 unit pertama ditambah pula 0.50 sen seunit. Ini saya tanyakan kerana mereka PNB hanya pernah berikan 3 kali sahaja sepanjang kewujudan PNB, yang 2 sebelum ini adalah meraihkan ulang tahun mereka. Kali ini saya tanyakan kenapa diberikan 0.50 sen ini. Ini atas kesedaran bahawa cost of living, kos hidup yang semakin meningkat, maka diberikan angka ini. Itu adalah prestasi PNB Yem kalau kita melihat. Sudah pasti ada banyak lagi fixed deposit lain yang boleh kita bandingkan. Sikit saja Yem saya nak tunjuk supaya kita faham di mana keadaannya. Kalau kita boleh bandingkan ini ASB dan juga fixed deposit yang lain. Mereka meletakkan mungkin fixed deposit 12 bulan untuk Maybank 2.27%. Ini prestasi yang baik dalam keadaan pada ketika ini, tetapi kalau kita bandingkan dengan ASB masih lagi bersifat pulangan yang lebih baik berbanding dengan keadaan semasa pasaran tersebut. Dan kalau kita melihat ASB berbanding dengan Bursa Malaysia, FPMK-STI juga, walaupun negatif sejak 2019, pulangan tetap masih lagi positif untuk ahli-ahli ataupun pemegang unit. Begitu juga sehinggalah kepada tahun 2022, meskipun FPMK-LCI tersebut pasaran kita negatif 6.7, pulangan masih 4.6 sen ditambah dengan bonus tambahan 0.50 sen. Ibrahim.
That was Najib Aroff's presentation. We'll go for a short break. When we come back, we'll discuss at length with Han Liew of RinggitPlus. Thanks for staying on with us. As promised, we have on the line Han Liew, of RinggitPlus, trying to unpack some of the ideas that went down when it comes to the PNB information and what is in store for us. This conversation was done last week. This is a recap of that conversation. As you heard just now, the conversation of how PNB had to perform under an unprecedented situation where both fixed income as well as equity, both globally and domestically, has registered negative returns for this year. One wonders what is in store for us for next year. Let's pull up that particular graph that was shown just now. This shows two things as far as I can pick up. Number one is that global asset allocation has risen from 17% to 19%. It's always great. But the second thing is that the cash position for both domestic and global is also long. 3% last year, 7% this year. Does that also bode well in terms of how the investment strategy for PNB is going to look like? Are they long on USD? Are they shorting ringgit? Are they long on global investments, particularly equity in public listed global as well? Are they short on local equity? Han.
Morning, Ibrahim. That's quite a lot there. I think the news on ASB was taken, you said it perfectly, which is totally understandable, right? Market's been very tough. This year, 2022, has been one of the toughest years for global markets. I think Najib showed that graph where there was nowhere to hide, right? You know, equities 20% down across many markets. You tried to hide in bonds. You're also down, you know, in double digits. And I think for PNB, tough environment, especially given their mandate, right? Their mandate is to ensure long-term returns for their deposit holders. For me, it looks like they've tried to stay invested in the local market. You can see very steady in terms of exposure, right? 60% is a lot to invest in the local market. I think that could be a mandate direct. And the most interesting thing you pointed out was cash, right? The foreign cash went up from 3% of the global allocation to 7%. Sounds like a very tactical move, but actually could be as a result of number one, the strengthening of the US dollar this year, coupled with a bit of ringgit weakness alongside. So that could be the cause of the increase in what looks to be increasing cash position for PNB, perhaps also getting ready for deploying more cash next year.
Okay, it's not just about PNB. It's not just about ASB, the fund. It's also about PNB in general and ASN, where 300 billion ringgit is being deployed. It is also indicative of how other funds are currently being deployed as well, either at QAP or EPF. do you feel that the aggression or the aggressiveness for them to continuously invest overseas has to be intensified? Because there's only so much that you can invest domestically. And I really don't buy that whole argument of you're depriving of local direct domestic investment. You really need to grow your money any way possible you can. And if it means increasing global asset allocation by whatever percentage now, plus 2 or 3 percentage point moving forward, that has to be done. Do you agree with this kind of view?
Yeah, I think, you've got to be very clear about your mandate, right? So we already have, obviously, the federal government putting fiscal stimulus in. We already have, Kerajaan National, whose purpose is for national development, right? But you look at what the purpose of people like ASB, or in the sense TNB, or people like EPF, KWSP, or KWOC, their objective is to get the most returns given the risk parameters they have for their depositors, for their members, and that should be seen in entirety, right? Which is, hey, look, we need to find the best returns regardless of where they may come from. So for me, if over the next 10 years or so it comes from investing overseas, so be it. We need to do the best we can for the people that are with us, right? You have to remember that these kind of three big public investment vehicles, they invest for the public, not necessarily for the country, but for the people, right? And the second part to that is that people contribute to it every year, which means in a ceteris paribus, all else equal world, these funds will continue growing beyond the capability of our local equity or bond market to absorb. So we need to look overseas purely because of that as well, right? It's not just a case of diversification, higher return. It's also because the size of these funds are starting to grow way beyond what our local capital markets can and should sustain.
There's also the whole idea of the position of cash. Do you feel that more cash needs to be deployed? Holding on to cash or holding on to foreign currency is one idea, but having 7% out of 340 billion ringgit AUM asset of cash means that you're not deploying it in strategic assets, both either fixed assets or equity. Are you okay with this kind of cash holding, not just by PNB, but perhaps eventually by EPF as well? We need to talk about them sooner rather than later when they announce the earnings for this year.
I think in 2022, having a bit of cash on hand is not a bad thing. We've seen that throughout, not just because of financial markets, but specifically to Malaysia because of things like folks removing or folks withdrawing from EPF, folks needing to tap into their ASB funds perhaps because of emergencies or whatever it may be. It was probably right for these funds to have a little bit more cash than normal at hand because they were preparing for these kind of withdrawals. It was a very, very uncertain couple of years. So it's probably the right move to have a little bit more cash than normal. But going into 2023, kind of the emergency part of the pandemic has kind of started to wash away from us. We're starting to recover. Now is the time to kind of think about redeploying your cash, looking at your liquidity position and saying, hey, look, like that kind of very acute emergency, people withdrawing money, the right withdrawing in large amounts is probably over. It's time to look at redeploying that cash, looking away from just pure liquidity needs into long-term asset allocation that you had before anyway.
On top of this, outside of PNB, QAP, EPF and other insti investors, we're looking at FDIs and FDI inflows into the country. A lot of data has shown that FDI inflows in the country has been drying up. And to put in contrast, our neighboring countries, a lot of FDIs are flowing in as well, particularly Vietnam and Indonesia. Of course, there's also the whole idea that we're having a new government, we're having a new paradigm shift. There's a lot that the government is promising that they will do. Time will tell whether or not they are able to execute these kind of ideas. Also, what needs to be said is the political risk and whether or not it has been abated and whether foreign investors are looking at us still at a high risk profile when it comes to political risk. And the third idea that I want to toss into the picture right now is our neighboring countries are much more competitive and are built structurally to be more competitive than us in the years to come. Where do we stand, Han, when it comes to attracting foreign direct investments in the near future? especially next year?
You raise a great point, Ibrahim. I think we have seen foreign direct investments, I would say, be not a bit lackluster. But what's not shared is that actually, if you look at what foreign direct investments been approved, it's actually at a multi-year high over the last 2 years, right? So we need to look at that gap. Why are there so many foreign investors or foreign companies looking to invest in Malaysia being approved, yet not actually carry out those investments? Is there a time lag? Is there an issue with execution? We probably, one thing I would say to the government is have a look at that. Like, we're doing quite well in terms of attracting them to make those calls and say, hey, look, would you like to invest? We'll approve you, get them approved. But the subsequent flow actually into the country is a lot less. So maybe there's kind of a little bit of project management needed on that side. We're doing well on the front end. Just need to carry those investors through to actually execute those investments. So that's on FDI. On political risk, I don't have a specific view at the moment. It was good that we have a government. It was tested in Parliament. Now I think if I was a foreign investor, I want to see, hey, look, like the budget, the mini budget passed. The next kind of hurdle in terms of political stability is the big 2023 budget, probably in February, where they retable it again. If that passes, then that sets the tone for a little bit more political stability. If I was a foreign investor, I'll be waiting for that. And third, I think you mentioned about structural advantages that our neighboring countries in ASEAN have over us. Honestly, the number one structural advantage that the big 4 or 5 have over us is demographics, population. But we have so much more to offer a foreign, multinational foreign investor, whether it's capital investment or financial investment. We have, a fairly sizable country. We have everything that you need to invest here first before going to the rest of ASEAN. What do I mean by that, right? So in the Klang Valley, we sort of have a mini Singapore, right? Lots of multinationals here, large English-speaking population, fairly well educated. It's like a little Singapore here, right? We have, in the suburban rural areas, very similar to Thailand, right? Highly agricultural, lots of little towns in the rural areas. So it's a bit like having a Singapore and then a big mainland Thailand around it. And then we have East Malaysia, which all the challenges around logistics, around transport, people and information are similar to what the Indonesians or Filipinos feel, right? In terms of ability to traverse the oceans, right? So for any multinational, I'll say, hey, look, like Malaysia is like a little ASEAN. Come and invest here first, right? Do your tests, do your pilot projects, do your hubs here. You can have, you can test on an urban audience, you can test on a rural audience, you can test, across the seas how your businesses can perform before you then tackle the other parts of ASEAN.
Han, 2 ideas I want to explore before we conclude our conversation this morning. Number one is, of course, the rising interest rates. We don't know the terminal stature of the interest rates here in Malaysia as well as US Fed. And of course, number 2, domestic consumption, considering that inflation is rising across all segments. And of course, whether or not we're going to be able to see wage increases in the years to come. Do you feel that inflation and domestic consumption is going to be impacted for 2023? Also, where do we stand in terms of the rising interest rates? Do you think that central banks across the world and in Malaysia is going to finally reach that whole desired interest rate levels that they have targeted for the longest of time right now?
I think the best way to describe inflation is that it's very much a 2022 story, right? Across the globe. And what we'll see is we're already seeing this last quarter inflation start to moderate. Now, it's because of the base effect, come off a high base, and every month we keep printing, still high inflation. But if you think about it, you look at the last kind of 3 to 4 months, right? Inflation in that 3 to 4 months actually it started to look like normal. As normal as you can be, i.e., not in a kind of emergency inflation, huge spike in inflation anymore. We had that huge spike at the start of the year, the first half of the year, and then now we started to kind of moderate a bit. So the year still looks bad, but for me, going to 2023, I think what we should be looking at is not so much inflation, but a recession, right? Global recessions, which will, on one hand, kindly solve the inflation problem, right? If it was still there to be solved. But if there wasn't that much inflation anymore, which there isn't over the last 3 or 4 months, then it might actually cause the opposite, which is we're starting to look at deflationary scenario depending on the depth of the global recession next year. It could happen as soon as first quarter, probably second quarter. So for me, like the story of 2022, very much inflation. The story of 2023 absolutely needs to be recession, and even possible a moderation of that inflation.
All right, thank you very much, Han. Any final word, Han, in terms of what are you going to do towards the final week of the year, and of course, what's in store for you guys at RinggitPlus for next year?
I mean, the team at RinggitPlus obviously are just closing out the year. It's pretty quiet for us. It's going to be quiet all the way to CNY actually, because we're very much based in Malaysia. Me personally, going to try and enjoy the festivities as much as possible. Haven't had a proper Christmas for a couple of years.
Oh wow!
Yeah, because of pandemic-related things. So probably going to spend good time with family and friends, and usher in the new year on a hopefully much better note than we did the last 2 years.
I mean, I hate to say it, but I don't want to jinx it, but it can't possibly get worse than 2022, right?
Oh no, you didn't say that.
I just jinxed it. Dude, you got to start wearing the Santa hat the way Aaron did just now. Then your life and your year will be more merrier.
Yeah, hopefully. But let's hope for a better 2023 than the last 2 or 3 years. It's been rough.
Thank you very much for taking the time to join us this particular episode. I wish you all the best and have a great week ahead.